Welcome to Redefining ABCD. And I started Audacity. All right, cool. So, hey everybody, welcome back. Today, Sneha and I will be talking about how a cultural appropriation affects us as Desis. So for this larger than us episode, we're going to kind of dive into like what we define, how we kind of define cultural appropriation, how it kind of affected us growing up when we were trying to figure out our identity in terms of culture and being like Indian, and then how we kind of handle that now that we've kind of gotten a better sense of our cultural identity. And then we'll flip the sides and see how our community culturally appropriates things from other people's cultures. And then finally, we'll wrap it up with some thoughtful questions to leave you lingering with it at the end of the episode. So, to start off, I guess, very basic question we should start off with is how would you define cultural appropriation, and where do you kind of see it in the U.S. here?
I think for me, I would define cultural appropriation when aspects of a minority culture is kind of taken out of context and romanticized by mainstream culture.
Right.
And I think the biggest one for me that I've noticed is like accessories, like outfits and stuff, like, you know, with the mehendi, like a print, or like the long skirts and the like some of the prom dresses. If you notice, they're starting to kind of look like lehengas now, and you're like,
Right.
okay, cool. And then another big one that I thought of, which is kind of almost like normal now, like it's accepted as a normal, which is food, like chicken tikka masala. Like any food that you get in an Indian restaurant, honestly, here, it's like very like not really Indian food. Like you can't tell me you get chicken tikka masala and also know everything about Indian food. Like that's just not how that works. And it's just it's that one irritates me a lot because like I'm like, look, like for a long time, you know, when we were younger, when it wasn't cool, like people would just be like, you smell like curry, and that make that like a negative sort of thing. And I'm just like, okay, so now it's cool, I guess. That's
right.
Fun. So yeah, I don't. Those are the two big ones that I can think of on the top of my head. But I don't know what you thought.
No, I kind of feel the same way. I kind of echo what you said about like your definition of cultural appropriation. I honestly feel like it's like an imitation more, like an uneducated person imitating a tradition, religion, or maybe like a language or an aspect of culture to kind of benefit it from it, whether it be like maybe like make a joke about it, get money off of it. Because I know so many people who try to make money off of culture. Oof. Branding, you know, lots of companies that do that and stuff like that. So I think it's not good. And I like you said, where we see it, the iconic ones that everybody knows, hopefully at this day and age, the Starbucks tea latte, like TT latte or whatever.
Bad. Yeah. Oh yeah.
Yoga, oh my god, the traumatic stories, because I like to do yoga, so the traumatic stories I had growing up with the various white yoga instructors, oh man. And like you said, clothing, fashion trends, and whatnot, and food. And weirdly, I started noticing this as well, and I think Sneha and I have talked about this in the past, like, and off the podcast. Like, weirdly, like, dating and stuff like that, I kind of can see that too. Like, social interactions of trying to prove that, like, I know what Indian culture is. I eat saag paneer. I eat chole bhatura. I love gulab jamun. Like, they like try to prove themselves. I feel like that, in a sense, is also cultural appropriation. Just because I'm like, why are you trying to prove that you know my culture? I don't care.
It's that one is weird too, because you're like, I kind of see where you're coming from because you're trying to connect with me, but like I'm more than just being Indian, right? Like I have, like, would you go up to a white person and ask them like, hey, like, you know, I want to know about where you came from. Like no one's gonna want to do, like, it's just weird. Like, why are you trying to, like, I don't know, like be the cool, like be like, oh, I'm cultured. Like, why are you trying to prove that
yeah.
Like, I don't need you to do that. Just ask me about like my favorite hobbies or something. Like, I don't
Right.
know. Like, why is that your first thought? I don't know. It's weird. I just,
Yeah.
yeah.
It kind of makes me think though, just because a lot of times stereotypes kind of go into that situation as well. Like,
Yeah.
out of curiosity, do you feel like stereotyping is a form of cultural appropriation in that sense then?
I mean, I don't know, because stereotyping is more like, I feel like cultural appropriation is more about trends and like what's cool and what's not cool. It's almost like the positive spin to stereotypes, whereas stereotype just feels like it has like a negative sort of connotation. And I think like stereotyping is also easier to point out, right?
Mm,
It's like a negative thing, so you're like, "Oh, that is not great. Maybe don't do that." Like, why are you, it's easier to identify in conversation as opposed to cultural appropriation, because it comes off as like they're doing something nice. They're like appreciating. But it's like, no, it's a little weird for me that you're lecturing me about something that I grew up with. Like, it's a
right.
little weird. It's a little weird.
It's like a
So, I don't know.
like you mentioned, it's like kind of like mansplaining, but like for
Yeah.
culture. Now that I think about it,
Yeah.
it's kind of
Yeah.
weird.
Yeah. No, exactly. It's like it's almost equivalent to like when certain men will try to be like, "Oh, it's actually pretty safe on the streets. Why are you freaking out?" And you're just like, "Okay,
You'll
well, I
never
can't really
understand.
explain it." Yeah, you'll never get it, and I can sit here and try to explain, but like, no. just just
No.
just accept that you don't know. Like, I think it comes from like this idea of like people are scared to be wrong, right? Especially when it comes to like, racial courtesy and like cultural courtesy and all this stuff. Like, people are just scared to come off as ignorant. So they
Right.
try to be like, "Oh, I can relate. I understand where you're coming from." And
Or
I don't
like
know. Like, I don't know. It's just weird.
yeah, like, or like on the flip side, people will be too prideful to accept that they're ignorant and be like, I know
Yeah.
sometimes I'll like tell someone like, hey, that's kind of sexist. You shouldn't say that. Like roll their eyes and be like,
Yeah,
this
yeah.
is also sexist now. Come on, you guys are too soft for this day and
Yeah,
age. And
too
I'm
too
just like,
sensitive. I was like, all right, okay.
I like dark humor. I like a good like joke, but like that's too far. Like no, like there's a fine line.
There is a context to this delivery, and you just don't have it, sir. I'm sorry.
Right.
I don't know. I mean, yeah, like no, I like that comparison though, because mansplaining there's a similar connection between cultural appropriation and mansplaining.
Mhm.
So I like that a lot. I guess kind of moving on to the next question. Growing up, how did you feel when you saw instances of cultural appropriation in your life? Did it affect you in any way at how you perceived Indian culture when you were younger?
Yeah, so I feel like sometimes I felt offended. It just depends on what aspect of culture was being appropriated. So like clothes and stuff, I felt offended. Yoga, I felt sort of offended, but sometimes I'd feel like some instances I feel like I felt more embarrassed than like offended at times.
Yeah.
Like some of the more subtler things that are like appropriated, because like when you think about like when we were younger, we were still trying to juggle like our Indian American identity. So it was kind of really blurred of like what Indian culture really is. I feel like I didn't really have a grasp of knowing how we could define culture because it's such a complex aspect of you. So
Yeah.
I think in that sense, I felt more embarrassed, which kind of led to being more embarrassed about like Indian culture. I'm like, so this is how people see this aspect of culture that we kind of do growing up, and it just I think it like of course later on when you appreciate your culture, that's when it becomes more of like embarrassed to offended. But I think that was like mainly how I felt. I was more conscious about it when I was younger. Like, oh my gosh, like this is how people think this is weird. That means it must be weird. And
Yeah,
so
yeah.
yeah, and it also felt weird because, like I mentioned before, it felt like people were just trying to prove themselves, like that
Hmm.
they knew it, right? So it was just like, which is weird. There's a lot of weird
Yeah.
emotions. I like it. Yeah, it's just yeah, just being younger and being more aware about what other people are saying just makes it a little bit worse as well.
Well, for me, it wasn't really. It's similar but different sort of experience. I honestly didn't really know. I wasn't able to identify what cultural appropriation was because I hadn't even heard the term until like much later, right? Like,
Hmm.
I didn't hear it until like the end of high school, beginning of college, even because we were again surrounded by Indian people. So like what that, like, I just accepted like whatever cultural appropriation was going on in our group within our Indian culture, cultural appropriating our own culture. I just accepted it as a norm because I was like, it's coming from a South Asian person, so it must be true, you know.
Right.
So, and it's like it's bad because like I think I internalized that to some extent, and there's like definitely like aspect, like I think there's like a reverse superiority complex that comes from that. It's almost like, oh, like whatever the mainstream culture says is probably correct, you know. And
Hmm.
like that's horrible because I mean, and I think it's like a pretty natural sort of thing that happens in like what 13, 14, you know, like you're just kind of like, I don't know, you're like, oh, this is what mainstream is, this is what I see on social media, this is what I see on, you know, on TVs and movies and all this stuff. And I just kind of been like, oh, okay, that makes sense, I guess, sure, why not, like
Right.
I don't know, it was weird. And then now obviously I'm just like, oh well, that was bad. Like, oh, it wasn't great. But
I like how
yeah.
you brought up a good point though, 'cause I feel like a lot of us, like not just you and I, kind of felt that way when we were younger. Just because if you think about it, when you grew up in high school, or not even high school, like just growing up in a predominantly South Asian community, a lot
Yeah.
of the things that we like, I guess, was that were jokes or funny back in that day was based on like our culture. Like people would make fun of
Yeah.
themselves, and it. I feel like it, in a sense, cultural appropriation. The influences of that kind of led to internalized racism because like people would start making fun of themselves and degrading like various aspects of culture because that's where we've seen it in various places like in media or like
Yeah.
other
Yeah.
people that are not Indian make fun of it. So I think in a weird way it does, like you mentioned, it is very internalized and it becomes internalized racism, I think.
Yeah, no, and it's weird because like I think back then like none of us knew better, right? Like we none of us. I'm not gonna say, I'm not gonna point to any. I don't think any of us knew better. We were just kind of
Right.
individually maybe thought it was weird, but it was never brought up in the group because that wasn't cool, right? Like like appreciating your culture was not cool. Self-deprecating yourself was cool, and that's not great. Especially if it happens over and over and over again, it just becomes this like mantra, like, oh yeah, yeah, this is the normal, this is what happens, like this is what's right. You get comfortable in that like appropriation, like self-deprecating sort of thing. So I don't know, it's very difficult. And I hopefully, like obviously, like I think as it's become more I've gotten older and have moved away from South Asian community and seeing like firsthand how it's like more obvious once you move away from your own,
Right.
like, you know, like it's easier to identify. You're like, oh, you're not South Asian and you're trying to do something that is very close to South Asian. That's a little weird. I'm more uncomfortable in the situation. Like, this is weird. So I don't know. I think like it's definitely taken a bit to try to get to this point. I don't know.
Right, right, yeah, and like it's just kind of ironic that like you mentioned in the, when we were talking about like the definition of cultural appropriation, how like we would bring food and stuff, and it was weird when we were younger, but like
Mm-hmm.
now it's like, oh, it's so cool that you're eating like rotis or chapatis and like
Yeah.
this or whatever. Like I can eat dosa now. There's a huge crave of dosa among like people outside of the South Asian community lately, and
Mm-hmm.
I'm just like, why can like
Well,
why this is not fair?
Well, it's also weird because like, you know, coworkers or like people that you see on a daily basis, like, you know, people in school, you know, they'll come up to you and be like, "Oh my God, I learned how to make this really great curry the other day. Isn't that so cool? Isn't that so great?" I'm like, "Okay." Like I mean, good for you. I'm so proud that you are appreciating the culture, as long as you're not doing it in a way where it's like, as long as you're looking at recipes that are actually South Asian,
Right.
like created, right? Like I think there's also a lot of like people will be like, "Oh, I make curry at home," but then they won't be using the Indian spices that we are used to. You know, it's not Indian
Mhm.
spices. You're making Indian food without the spices that are necessary to make that food. And in a way, you could argue that's cultural appropriate. It's a little weird. Like what, like I don't know. It just feels like you're downgrading an entire, like, you know, I don't know. Or like, and it only becomes an issue when like, oh, oh God, it only becomes an issue when they start like lecturing me about Indian cooking, and I'm just like, I don't know where to go from here. Like, I don't know what to tell you. Like, I'm sorry. Like, I just suck at cooking. Period. Like, I don't know.
It
But
also
yeah.
angers me like when I see like people trying to monetize it. Like you see like white people
Mm-hmm.
like look at my cookbook and I use
The Food
turmeric and all
Network.
these things. I'm like, oh my god.
Oh god.
I feel like you were the person who like made fun of the smell when you were younger, and now you're like, oh
Mm-hmm.
shoot! Now that I know actually how to cook, and I went to culinary school, I can actually appreciate it. I'm like, god damn it!
Well, it's also like the way that like these kind of things, like occasionally, I'll be scrolling through, some social media platform, and a CNN article will pop up and it'll be like new doctor Western doctors like or something like, they've found out that honey helps with burns, and I'm like, that shit has been like, we knew that that's been in our, like, we know, like, it's been
Right?
passed down from generation after generation. The positives of turmeric, the positives of, like, I'm like, oh my god, like, we've literally been doing this for years and years and years, and now you finally discovered it, and now it's like mainstream. Like, okay, all right,
Like
sure,
the, you know how like
like,
whenever you have a cold, your parents would like put Vicks in hot water and then put
mm-hmm,
the towel over your
yeah.
head and do it. That's like a low key like a DIY humidifier. Like god damn it! Like
Yeah,
you want
yeah, like,
to
Avi
just
pretty good
cook
at that. It's like,
it.
no, no, it's like a thing. Like, Avi pretty good at this, like a whole concept that's been doing it for generations, and y'all are just, all right, whatever. That's also henna. Henna has become a huge topic of romanticism. Like, I have
Right.
seen people legitimately get like permanent tattoos of henna on their hands. I'm like,
Oh no,
but
so
you're
you're
not you. But and
offline.
if you ask them, they'll just be like, oh, but the actual henna is like poisonous. It's not good for your skin. I'm like, oh, okay, okay, that's fine.
Oh
That's fine, I
no.
guess. But, oh, Keerthi, you're gone. Are you gone? Uh, so I definitely lost connection. Shit. Uh, hmm. Shit.
uh,
Okay, there we go. How long was I out?
a minute or so.
Shit. Wait, where
Um,
did I get cut off?
gonna be honest with you, I'm not really sure because you just started something. So we'll
Fuck.
like
Okay,
backtrack.
that's fine.
Okay.
We'll just delete all of that. It's fine.
No, no, it's fine. We were talking about like when people monetizing, right?
Oh, yeah, yeah, yeah. Okay.
And it angered us. What were we talking about? Shoot.
I mentioned henna. Henna is a huge.
Oh, okay. Let's start there.
Okay, okay, okay. Yeah, so another like cultural appropriated thing that I've seen that's like kind of been like a huge thing nowadays is like henna. And I feel like a lot of people, like, I just see so many, like, it's become like a thing that people can do like permanent tattoos for, and like, it's like, it's weird. Like, and if you ask them, it's almost like they, like the traditional like Indian henna cone, whatever. I feel like they just have a negative tone to that. They're like, "Oh, but like, what's the point? Like, that's not good for your skin. Like, it's not great for it." I'm like,
Mardani leaves are meant like
okay.
it like soaks in when you do your henna and it gives you so much nutrients. Like there are
Mm-hmm.
benefits people don't see. And yes, I agree with you. That very much angers me too. Sorry, I'm like getting riled up.
No, I mean, it's like a thing though. Like, I don't know. It's
Like
just it's
with
just uncomfortable.
I think some aspects of like how I think also history. Just like when I was like
Mm-hmm.
in learning Bharatanatyam, like when I was training for my engagement, I like learned kind of like the history, and a lot of times apparently like when the British took over India, they like took all of our traditions, medicine, like Ayurvedic, like all of our textbooks, and then just brought it back with them, and just like kept it in their libraries to use for their
Mm-hmm.
information and knowledge. So we lost a lot of our traditions, or like it got into a gray area because we were no longer able to pass it down to like future generations. And I was reading an article the other day after learning about this, and I was just like so pissed because apparently the British government, or like the European governments that have all of our scholarly like work in
They
history,
still have them.
still have it, and they will not let us
Mm-hmm.
use it. It's come to the point where Indian scholars will go fly out to like those libraries, take a pen and paper, and just literally copy everything down so that they can keep it preserved in their records. And I'm like, freaking British tried to take over like what so long ago, and they're still trying to take back what's theirs. How is that even fair? Like this is it angered me so
It's
much.
so weird. Well, and it happens. It's not just Indian culture, right? Like it's also African culture. It's also, I'm sure, some Asian cultures, like East Asian cultures, like Middle Eastern culture. Like there's so much like monuments, artifacts, scribes, books that were just been taken. They were just like taken, and then they still have them. Like I don't understand how that's even allowed, and how there's still rules that exist that allow for that to happen. And
Right.
that's crazy.
I
It's wild.
I feel like colonialism is like a fucked up version of cultural appropriation
Oh,
to the
for
extreme.
sure. Yeah.
Sorry that
Yeah.
I say the F word, but it just angers me every time when you see like Africa. When you read, like, people always assume that Africans and Africa is such an impoverished country. I was like, no, before the white people came in, they were very well off and they were satisfied in what they had. Like, even think about it, colonialism, you gotta flip the mindset. Like, the people, like the Europeans that kind of invaded all these countries, shows that they had nothing and they needed things. Like, they only had potatoes and whatnot, like milk or whatever, and they needed spices
Yeah,
from India.
yeah.
Like, that's why they invaded. Like, India was perfectly happy with what they were doing. Like pretty much a lot of they were so rich, and like we were such like a
Mhm.
enchanting country before the colonialism happened. And like after that, now people assume that India is just like an impoverished wasteland because there's too many
Mhm.
people and everybody's poor. Like no, like you guys did that. Like look at history and see. Like it's just so annoying. And
Like
I think
you threw off the balance that existed. Like you threw it
right,
off. Like
like
you're like an
greed.
invasive species. Like
Right.
you threw off the balance. I don't know. Yeah,
And
no,
that
I
like
agree. And
I feel
also
like
like
that misguides the cultural appropriation because no one
mhm.
really knows really the history behind it. They just read and listen to what they learn in school and just assume those stereotypes for those countries. Sorry, what were you saying?
Yeah. No, no, no. I agree. I was gonna ask if you want to talk a little bit about the yoga and like just the way that how bad it is, because I know you definitely have a lot of thoughts on that.
Yes, I have a lot of thoughts. So, I let me just tell one story that I feel like will anger a lot of the South Asian American listeners or any of the podcast listeners. So, I was trying to. So, like, when you do Bharatanatyam, a lot of times you do yoga training aside in addition to it because they go hand in hand, and that's how it's kind of done in tradition. So, unfortunately, there's not that many like Indian yogis in America, so you can't really like learn like the traditional way as easy here, especially being a college student and whatnot. So I decided to go to a yoga studio that was run by white people. Um, Weirdest experience ever. I feel like I was tripping on LSD when I went in there because it was all like the hippie, like all the decorations and everything
Oh.
was like the like hippie era of U.S. history that people associated with Indian culture. And then right before we started the class, I was talking to the yoga instructor. She was really nice, and she was just like, "Oh my god, the other day I made saag paneer and chole bhatura, and it was the most my famous thing ever. It was like so good, and like I think I'm just gonna convert over to all Indian food now." Like I was just like, good for you that you found the medicinal value and like the health value in Indian food, but you don't need to tell me that you're gonna convert to being Indian, like because of the food. I felt very uncomfortable. But then, as this yoga class is going on, she ends up using the Guru Brahma Guru Vishnu sloka in Hinduism as like one of the musics that we do like the stretches to, and it was so awkward because it had an EDM hip hop beat in the background. So just imagine someone beatboxing to Guru Brahma Guru Vishnu. I felt so uncomfortable. I was like, bro, people chant this in like them temples and stuff like that. Like there's so much value in meaning. Like Guru Brahma, Guru Vishnu means like how we value teachers and gurus in our life, and they come in various forms. And you're putting this to like some hip hop beat in the background and like shaking your butt to it. Like I felt so weird. It was yeah. So that's my his experience of doing it. yoga in the US. I'm
No,
sure it's
I
not like this, but
no, I okay, here's the thing though, like I think also isn't it also like the positions and the way that the positions like interact with each other and how many times you do them. Like I think the biggest difference here, like the yoga here is very like stretching
and
and ab
aesthetically
workout.
pleasing, quote
Yeah,
unquote, for the ladies.
yeah. Yeah, like you're trying to get that like figure, right? Like that's like the goal. And I think in like traditional yoga is more for yourself. It's more about like a spiritual kind of awakening. It's more about like breathing and meditating and like letting air flow through your body in a natural way. It's but like that was the core, but I think people have taken it out of context and is now is this like sport. It's like a sport and it's
Right.
athletic, like and it's like
It's like a
you're trying to
Pilates.
stretch and like yeah, you're getting like muscles and definition and toned bodies, and I'm like, you're not doing it right if you're getting like I don't know. It's just weird.
Yeah, like yoga traditionally, based on what I've been able to learn from like the few Indian yoga teachers that I've had, is like it's a mindset. Like, yeah, you
Hmm.
practice yoga, but it's like when you start out with breathing, and then you go into like intense stretches for the mind, and um, then you end off with shavasana, which is meditation. It's supposed to show you how you can integrate these small types of activities and stretches and whatnot in your daily life. Like that's why we start with breathing. So like how to control your breathing, how to expand your lungs, and kind of appreciate
Hmm.
every part of your body. And it just now has become like a business. Like how you want to lose weight, do yoga. Like
Yeah.
or like let's do yoga on the beach or freaking yoga with goats. What the hell is that? Like I saw a video of
I did see that.
was like, what the heck? Like, I wanted to go to the yoga instructor and slap them and send the goats back to the farm. Like, what the heck? Oh my god.
Like, what are you trying to say here? What are you doing?
It's like,
Yeah, no, I. Mm-mm.
there's a fine line between appreciation and appropriation, and I feel like appreciation is when, like, I've had friends be like really appreciative of Bharatanatyam and be like, "Can I learn?" And I'm like, "Sure." You want to learn the real Bharatanatyam? That's appreciation. Appropriation would be like trying to make money off of it and making Bollywood into Bharatanatyam. Like I've seen that also happen. Oh my
Oh
god.
yeah, yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah.
So there's a
No,
fine
I
line.
I was gonna say it's also difficult because like yoga is such a mainstream. It's like a trend now, or it has been for a couple of years now, and like it's hard because like as a South Asian person, like I hate to say it, but I have been on that train, right? I was like looking up YouTube videos of nice yoga things that I can do, and it was in the intention of stretches and like doing all this stuff, and like I it's just like I didn't realize it was cultural appropriation because that was the only thing that was accessible to me. Like I
Hmm.
didn't like my tata and my aunt they both do like meditation every single day, and I think the first time I saw them doing it, my immediate reaction was like that is so different than what I am used to seeing on like YouTube or like whatever. And now like actually fun fact that this happened not so long ago, actually I hate to say it, but 3 or 4 months ago my mom was trying to teach me like traditional Indian yoga, and I was like kind of being annoying about it. I was like, but this is not what I've been doing for the last 2 years, like you know what I mean. I've been looking at YouTube videos, I've been doing this, and like I'm not going to say that she's not doing it off, like she is a white woman who's doing it, but she is I could give her the benefit of the doubt because I was like, this is all I had. Like this is all I knew.
Right.
So it's weird. It's weird for me to shift brains and be like, oh, this is how I should be doing it. This is the official way. So I don't know. I felt bad. And I
It
still feel bad. But I don't know.
I
I'm
think
just
it's
used to it.
understandable in that point of view, just specifically how you never really grew up with the influences or the education about it.
Yeah.
Like in that sense, I feel like that it's understandable and it's appreciative that you were able to kind of change your mindset, right? So like
Yeah.
it's not like I get where you're coming from. Like I can't believe I didn't know this before, but like you got to think about like we're also South Asian in a different country,
Yeah.
so I'm sure it was hard.
Exactly. Yeah, yeah. It's not great. I never made the connection. Like I don't know how or what. I just like, oh, this is like, well, and I think it's also because my doctor specifically told me 2 years ago, like, hey, you should do yoga to stretch out your muscles and be more flexible. So I always went
Um,
in with that intent, right? That was my intent. And it was a professional telling me. So I was like, oh, of course, what you're saying is right, obviously. But like, I guess like the spiritual, like the mindset kind of aspect to it got lost in the way because I was just kind of like, I need to get my body up to shape. Like, I need to make it work. Like, I don't
I
know.
think I think primarily where that comes in, like the meaning of yoga, like that's like an example, but in general, like how we have like meaning behind every small
Mm-hmm.
tradition that we have in our culture. I think that gets lost in translation a lot of times is
Yeah.
specifically within the South Asian community. I feel like when someone tells you to do something, they don't tell you why you should do it. Like if you're going to a puja, like they tell you to do arati like 7 times, right? Like no one, they just say just do
Mm-hmm.
it. Like no one ever asks the why. Like why am I doing it 7 times? Because I feel like once you ask that question why, that's when you really understand traditions. Um, but a lot of
Yeah.
times it's gotten so lost in the generations because everybody's just like just do it. That people are just like
Yeah.
we just do it. I don't know why, and that's where the lost in translation happens, or like how people kind of get quote unquote embarrassed or like
Mm-hmm.
unconfident of their Indian side is because they don't know what they're doing. They've just been forced like down like to like go to the temple and do various things in Indian culture. And like they never got the chance to appreciate it, right? I think that's just one side. Like there's like this one tradition, like when you're about to have a baby, when you're recently married. I know this is in Tamil, South Asian culture. Um, right after you get married, you do a ceremony where you do a puja right in front of a neem tree, and then the husband and like the newly bride and husband will walk around the neem tree like 7 or 8 times. And so the scientific reasoning behind that is the neem tree gives off like this smell or something like that that kind of enhances those hormones or like those things that help the reproductive system in your body, so that when you walk around 7 or 8 times, that gives you enough to like when you want to have a child, like it'll be a higher chance of being successful. So
Right.
like that is like ingrained in our culture 2000 years ago, before IVF and all that type of modern medicinal technology has been there. Like the painful, like women have to painfully like inject themselves so often. It's such an expensive process, but we've already kind of thought about these types of things and ingrained it in our traditions, but not that many people know why we do it. So I feel like we have to start questioning, why are we doing everything? Why do we go to a temple? Why do we start with Ganesha? Why do we then do this, do that? Like, if you just start asking why, I feel like that's when you can appreciate what all is in
Yeah.
our like culture.
I think it's also difficult. Like, okay, so I think you're right. You are correct, but I think it's been changed so often throughout that 2000 year period that it's all become. It's not that they've gone away. They're just like micro cultures now. So there's so
Right.
many different traditions that happen within. So like it could change depending on family. Like that's how micro the cultures have become,
I
right?
agree.
Like what your family customs are very different than what your other family customs are within India itself. And you
Mm-hmm.
don't even have to be that different in social class, right? Two middle class families can have very different customs and traditions and interpretations of what that original culture stated, what that original tradition stated. So it's again difficult because when you're here, you're constantly aware of those like different cultures, microcultures within the community, especially around all these South Asian people that were the amount of South Asian people that we were around, like with that, and also the idea of like this American Western side culture that's like taking up this room. So oftentimes it's hard to like pick and choose like what works best for me, what makes the most sense, what is cultural appropriation, what is not cultural appropriation, who came up with what first. It's hard, like it's so difficult to just untangle that mess. And
I
oftentimes
agree.
like you just do what you need to do. And then
Right.
you unlearn and relearn later on in life, and that's just how it is.
Yeah, culture has gone through so much. Like in the
Hmm.
2000 years, history, politics, invasions have all affected various aspects of culture. And like you said, to a level where like it changes between family, all the traditions and the pujas and whatnot. Like
Yeah.
what? Like while like a really long time ago, dance, like classical dance, when the invaders came in, they assumed that it was prostitution. Like because
Right, right.
women were wearing like they weren't wearing little clothing, but they were wearing comfortable clothing to dance. So it was deemed as prostitution. There was like a dark age in classical arts for a really long time. So now that everybody's become very conservative, and like covering up the body now is because like before we weren't like that. But then colonialism, like invaders came in and altered it, and now like now you see like conservatism in terms of women's body and objectifying it very deeply ingrained in the social culture in India and like in Indian culture and whatnot, and the upbringings and stuff like that. And so it's like culture can take a deep turn. So yeah, exactly. What tradition is actually the original tradition? It's like I honestly now that we're so far along, I honestly feel like we're not really following a lot of the original traditions. It's
Yeah.
some variation of it, but at least you still follow it and appreciate it. I feel like it's a good thing.
No, I think no, and I think what you said, like asking why, I think that's so important because I definitely don't do that as much as I should. Like I just kind of go through the motions because we were taught from a young age to just trust your neighbor, trust your friends,
Right.
trust your culture, trust the people around you. But like this blind trust, sometimes I'm just curious. Like I just want to know, and it's weird because if you ask, I think even our parents don't maybe necessarily know why they're doing something. You know what I mean? Like it's been
Right.
passed down for years and they themselves have kind of gotten it into just a routine. So now we're like, oh, but why do we do this? I don't know. It's just part
My
of the
tata
tradition.
told me. Like,
Yeah,
yeah, like my
yeah.
grandparents just told
Like
me.
my parents told me, my grandparents told me, we just keep doing it, and then it's a thing. So that's why, like, I don't know, I don't know.
And I think this is a good way of how you can handle it, like cultural appropriation now, just because like if you kind of start knowing the why, when people kind of like do something that kind of offends you, like maybe whether it be a microaggression or like saying like I love sag paneer or whatever it is, you can like
Yeah, yeah,
educate them and be like, hey, this is why we do it. Like one thing that kind of brought into my mind. People think it's so weird to eat with their hands, and I don't know why. Like
hmm
outside of Indian culture, they deem it as dirty. Well, if you know the reason why Indian people eat with their hands, you can then explain to them, hey, it's not dirty. We are actually, it's very scientifically beneficial, and that's why we eat with our hands. And I guess I'll plug this into, so for people who don't know why we eat with our hands. So in Ayurvedic, they believe that like all of our senses are connected. And so the reason why we eat with our hands is you're smelling the food, you're basically seeing the food, and the touch is like the final like sense that you need, right? Like all the other things are like already um,
covered.
there when you're seeing the plate of food in front of you. So we use
hmm
touch to like enhance that appetite. So we're enhancing your appetite by touching the food and eating it. So it's not dirty. We're trying to increasing our appetite and making sure we're eating a full, healthy, like fully balanced meal by like touching it, eating it,
Well,
hearing
yeah,
it,
and
and whatnot.
also there's an etiquette to it, right? Like I
Right.
remember my tata, I can hear my tata. It's a one thing that he's such a stickler about. No food on the palm of your hands. No food on the palm of your hands. That's like messy. That's gross. Like what are you doing? Like you have to eat it like that's how you eat
Right.
rice. Like it's no hand, no food in the palm of your hands. That's a rule. It's a
My
rule and it's ingrained.
Yeah, my friend, she was saying whenever she goes to India, her parent, like her grandparents were very strict about it. Like after they would eat, they would check their hands, and if you like did had like food that was beyond like the tips of your fingers on your hand, they would like scold you. And like
Yeah.
there's an etiquette. Like there's yeah, you're right. There's an etiquette, just like as like when silver, where we have to set the fork on the spoon on the right or left side. Exactly. Like we
Yeah.
have etiquette with our hands too. It's not dirty. Like,
Yeah, it's
but
it's a
yeah,
tradition. Like, and you trying to make me feel bad about it is like not gonna work, I assure you. I've been doing
right.
it since I was a very young girl. Like, you can try, you go ahead, but it's not gonna work. I'm just gonna get angry at you. Like,
Right. And if you like know why, you'll be more confident in yourself. I feel like that happened to me. Like sitting on the ground and eating, I thought that was very weird just because we grew up with like tables, fork and
yeah,
spoon. And every time I went to India we'd sit on the ground and eat and like eat on the like a banana leaf. But like once I learned why we did everything, I was more confident about myself and I was able to kind of exude that or teach other people who were like
yeah,
embarrassed or like making offense of it rather than getting it affect me and making myself feel more conscious, I feel like.
yeah. Yeah, it's wild. Anyways, okay.
Yeah.
Well, we
So
gotta move on because we've been talking for like 35 minutes. Have not even answered
no, some of it
question.
was like a networking issue, so don't worry.
No, I agree. Okay.
Okay,
Anyways,
I'll flip. Okay,
anyways,
yeah. So,
yes.
so cranking on down to the next question. Woo woo. So let's flip the sides now. I feel like we need to start like focusing on the other aspect of cultural appropriation in our community, whereas like mainstream South Asian culture, or like not culture, like the narrative of what mainstream South Asian kind of looks like. Do you think cultural appropriation influences that image or that view that we kind of see? Like, I feel like we need to talk about this because it's kind of like an unspoken truth where people kind of understand it and know that it's there, but no one really talks about it.
You're asking like, do different minorities within America like cultural appropriate each other, right? That was a
Right. So, like specifically, like in South Asians, like, do you think what are some things that we culturally, not we, but like our community, kind of culturally appropriates from other like other people's cultures? You know.
okay. Yeah, 100%. I think, I mean, like, it's inevitable, right? Like, okay, and I think the biggest, like, offender is probably, like, the black culture in America. I think South Asians just observing South Asian people in our community who appropriate black culture and just don't see an issue with it, but also turn around and have an issue with other people doing henna or something. Like it's just
Right.
weird. It's that weird double standard.
Mm-hmm.
It's like I think it comes from the whole idea of like, oh, I'm POC, so I can't culturally appropriate other cultures. Like that's not possible, and that's just not true. Like it can happen regardless of your race or identity or whatever, you know?
Right.
Like
I
I don't
100%
know.
agree. I
And
100%
it's just
agree.
ignorance. Like that's okay. Like it's okay if you don't know better. Like but just accept it and then don't
Learn.
appropriate. Yeah, just learn, relearn. I don't know.
Yeah,
Um
exactly. Like just echoing your thoughts, I think exactly the same way. So I'm just gonna call them out just because we
Go
can.
for it. Yeah, oh yeah. Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
So there's a title in our community called the Indian fuckboys. So
Mhm.
I feel like those types of people, or people who try to exude that stereotype or kind of think that stereotype is cool, very much culturally appropriate African American culture. The music that they listen to, all the stereotypes that they like kind of exude, they try to be like African American people. I feel like that is 100% cultural appropriation, and it's disrespectful. And I see that like a lot, especially when we were like in like the early 20s, like when they're trying to figure out themselves. I see that a lot. So I'm just gonna call them
Mhm.
out. Like that's one instance I've seen. Like, and like you said, a lot of other aspects of various parts of culture, like African American culture and other minority groups, are I can see people doing it because, but not in the mindset of like trying to make money off of it or trying to get something out of it. It's just like trying to look cool. I've seen. I
Yeah,
haven't
I mean,
seen
I
like
guess they
money
kind of
yet.
are though, right? Like it's clout. They're trying to get clout.
True,
they're
true.
trying to
Social
get the
money.
attention. Yeah, yeah. Like
Right.
they're like, "Oh, I'm going to, you know, I'm going to act like someone who's black and then hope and it's going to be make me cooler." So it is like it's definitely cultural appropriation, but I
Right.
don't think they identify it as such, which is kind of scary, but that's okay.
And I
Um
like, and I also want to talk about like how like I think I agree with you. Like I think it's unfair that like we complain about how people culturally appropriate our culture and get angry about it, but then people like those same type people may like say like do things that are culturally like inappropriate for some cultures,
mhm.
and it's kind of like this. Like a lot of people are like, "Well, you're a minority, you can't be racist." Well, we can.
It's
Like, there's a lot
not
of
true.
concern. Like you may be surprised. Like a lot of Indian people, like I know like some like Indian aunties and uncles that are pretty that can get pretty like racist, homophobic in their mindset, are very conservative. And yeah, like we just because we're a minority, we doesn't mean that like it's not possible. Like no, it's possible, and we have to recognize that in our community and like put a stop to it.
Yeah, we need to be able to equate the two and be like, okay, yeah, this is still wrong. Like it's still not a great thing to be doing.
Like
And I
you
think
can,
it just I don't know. I
sorry.
think it just comes with like calling each other out too. Like I don't know. Like I think it's more powerful for another South Asian person to call out another South Asian person. You know what I mean? Like
100%,
it's like
100%.
that. It's a trust your neighbor thing. Like you know.
Right, like we preach, treat others the way you want to be treated, but like you say this, but then you do that. Like no, like follow what you say. Like
Yeah.
we need to call each other, and I think it's powerful if we do it to each other, like you said, Sneha.
Hmm.
Um, but yeah, do you think, out of curiosity, do you think South Asians outside of India can kind of culturally appropriate their own culture?
100%. I mean, I've done it. I just admitted, I'm sure, like the whole yoga story for sure. Like I was giving my mom shit about not knowing yoga or like her yoga being different than my yoga. And that's like cultural appropriation for sure.
Mm-hmm.
But I think it comes from again ignorance. It's just like we didn't know better. We're just clinging on to I don't know, things that we were kind of internalized for a long time and taught to us by media or movies or TV or other South Asian people or even non South Asian people. We just accepted it as a norm. And yeah, that's
Mm-hmm.
great.
Yeah, I think ignorance is also, and also like just like the pressures of wanting to fit in kind of affect that as well,
Yeah.
because a big thing that I feel like a lot of people culturally appropriate in our culture, like their own culture, I would think of
Mhm.
as like Coachella or like Lollapalooza. You know, like that bindi, like that art on
Yeah.
their face,
Mhm.
like that.
Mhm.
Yes, that's the bindi. But I still see a lot of South Asians that go to those events or like concerts do that or try to fit in and wear all that stuff, or like the patterns and prints that you're supposed to wear when you go to Coachella, Lollapalooza, whatever. So I feel like that's also the kind of thing, like pressure of wanting to fit in a culture that you're not really part of, can also
Yeah.
kind of affect that as well.
Yeah. I mean, not to say you shouldn't go to Coachella or Lollapalooza, but like if you're going to
Right.
cultural appropriate your own outfits and like I don't know, it just feels off. Like it feels weird. But maybe I don't know. I don't know.
Like maybe
Maybe
go, but then like yeah, like I realized like the
like
bindi is
understand.
yeah, like
Yeah. Yeah.
right. Yeah, it
Um
definitely
for
happens.
sure. For sure can happen. Yeah. So I guess moving on. Do you think is it our job to correct or call out people?
I
Like
think
at
it's
what point should we just like resign ourselves to no? They need to learn on their own.
yeah, I think that's tricky because I feel like I don't trust people to learn on their own. I'm going to be honest here because, like, if you're culturally appropriating things, that means you're already not educated or you don't want to go seek out the correct way. But I feel like it's like
Yeah.
depends on the scope. Just like asking the questions like, how does it affect me? How does it affect the people that I'm around? How does it affect the viewpoints they think of me? And how also like the important question, how do I feel when someone does this? Because like yoga story that I just said, that kind of made me feel very uncomfortable. So that if I had the guts at that
Yeah.
time, I would have gone and corrected her. I think that would be like instances of where I would kind of approach. But if it was like a small thing where like I love saag paneer and like stuff like that, I would just brush it off just because in the larger picture of things, there's so much more like headaches that we deal with. And it kind of goes along the lines of like how we talk about like people that are being prejudiced shouldn't have to go out of their way to educate people. It should be the allies that do that. So I kind of in that way too. Just like we can't be there for everything. Like there's so much going
Yeah.
on. So I think that's kind
Like
of my viewpoints. But at the same time, like I think learning yourself is just a one way of correcting the mindset as well. So
yeah. No, I pick and choose your battles.
right.
Like like if it's I usually I think just in general about calling out people about certain things, like it just in social situations and stuff, like I think it just depends on how well I know this person or how offensive of what they're doing is. Like if I know them really well and I like care about their opinion and I care about what they I know that they're not doing it on purpose. Like it's just they just don't know better. I will call them out because I feel like there is a way to move past that. And I think like most of the time it's more of like, oh shit, I just didn't know. I'm sorry. Like and they're very quick to change it and like, actively work on not doing that again. But I think when it comes to like people who are just adamantly refusing and I just don't know them, I don't really care about their opinion all that much. I don't necessarily have to be around them all the time. I'm just gonna let it slide because like why should I fight you? I'm not like me as a person. I'm not going to fix cultural appropriation in this country
Right.
by telling this one person that I don't care about and who's clearly just being annoying on purpose. Like I have no inclination to change your mind. I'm just going to walk away. I can't like it's just no, not worth my time. I
Right,
don't know.
right. I agree with that.
Well, this has been fun. I don't know if you have any other like added thoughts about cultural or lasting thoughts, uh, last words on this topic before we conclude.
I think a good mindset to have when it comes to this is just like, just try to control things that are like that you can like try to worry about things that you can control. That's a lot of things. That's a good tip that I've learned along the way with various aspects of my life outside of this. Like, if you can if it's in your scope of controlling, you can do something about it. Then worry about it. And like, yeah, just learning yourself and growing yourself is the best way of just kind of going away from this.
No,
Um,
I agree. I agree. So with that, we will conclude this episode. It was so great talking about cultural appropriation. Really fun topic. A lot to say about it. A lot of rants. But it's been great. Thank you to our listeners who have stuck till the end. We always appreciative of your time here. And yeah, it's a good time.
yeah, we'll see you guys all in the next one. So before you kind of leave us today, I wanted to give a quick shout out to Revi Ray Audio. You might have heard that our intro and outro music is a little bit different this season and is definitely upgraded to a next level. That's all thanks to Revi Ray, who was our last guest in season 2, and he agreed to help us out with our music for season 3. So thank you so much, Revi Ray, for all your help. And if you guys want to get in contact with him to collaborate with any projects or work with Revi Ray Audio, we are linking his information to the episode description so you can reach out to him or see all the other projects he's done. And thanks again, Revi, and we'll see you guys all in the next one.